The first sign something was wrong was that my son answered a question nobody had asked him. We were standing in his kitchen in Dublin, just outside Columbus, with the smell of pot roast and onions hanging in the air. And Kelsey was asking me if I still took cream in my coffee. I had my mouth open to say no, black was fine, when Daniel said, "He does half and half now. Full cream bothers his stomach." He said it easy, not sharp, not enough for anybody else to stop moving. But I looked at him and he was already reaching past me for the carton like I'd gone dim in the 10 seconds since I took my coat off. Sunday dinner at Daniel's house had become a regular thing after Margaret died. 5 years was enough time for people to stop looking at you like a fresh wound, but not enough for the quiet to stop meaning anything. I still came most Sundays unless the roads were bad, or I could think of a reason that sounded reasonable even to me. Their place sat in one of those newer developments with curving streets and young maples planted too close together, every mailbox standing straight as a soldier. Nice house. 2-story brick front, 3-car garage kitchen big enough to lose your own voice in. I had helped make it possible, though nobody said that anymore. Kelsey gave me a quick smile and poured the coffee without asking again. "I can never remember," she said. "That's all right," I told her. The grandchildren were in the den arguing over a blanket. Somebody on television was talking about playoff seeding. A dish timer chirped. It was the kind of evening that ought to have felt ordinary. The kind of evening a man ought to be grateful for at 71 with a son nearby and grandkids who still ran when they heard the front door. I set the pie I'd brought on the counter and Daniel glanced at it. "Store-bought?" he asked. "From Keller's Bakery?" He nodded like I'd passed some small test. "Good. Kelsey's already got enough going." I said, "That was the idea." He clapped me once on the shoulder on his way to the oven. Not hard, not warm either. The kind of touch men use when they're showing the room they know how to manage it. I stood there with my coat still over my arm a second too long before Emily came in behind me and took it from my hand. "You're blocking traffic, Dad," she said. But she smiled when she said it. Emily was my younger 139, hair pulled back, winter coat still on, always looking like she'd come from someplace real. Daniel looked settled into his life. Emily looked like she'd fought hers a little more honestly. "I just got here," I said. "I know. That's how it starts." She hung my coat by the laundry room and leaned closer. "You okay?" "Sure." She studied my face a moment, then let it go. Emily had her mother's talent for knowing when a person was lying politely and choosing not to embarrass him over it. We sat down a little after 6. Pot roast green beans with slivered almonds, mashed potatoes, a salad. Kelsey had made with those candied pecans people started putting on everything. Daniel carved at the counter first, then brought in the platter like a man carrying in the result of his own labor. He sat at the head of the table. I had never thought much about seating before Margaret died. Afterward, I noticed it more. I used to sit at the end when we had holidays at my house. Not because I was king of anything, just because somebody had to sit there and carve the turkey or say grace or get up first if a kid spilled milk. Men of my generation get used to taking the edge of a table and holding a room together from there. At Daniel's house, I sat along the side between my grandson Tyler and the wall. Kelsey set the gravy boat down and said, "Dad, careful, that plate's hot." I looked at her. "I know." "Oh, sorry." She laughed a little and reached for her water. Daniel started in on the kids' school week. Then the neighbor putting in a fence, then some nonsense about interest rates and a couple they knew trying to buy bigger. He had a way of talking now that made everything sound like a presentation. He was 43 and good at being heard. I'd seen that in him when he was 12 and arguing for a dirt bike. Back then, I'd mistaken it for confidence. At one point, Tyler asked me if I'd ever had a car without power windows. I said first truck I bought didn't even have a radio worth turning on. "What kind?" he asked. Before I could answer, Daniel said, "His old Ford, the one he always talks about." I looked at Tyler. A 78 F-150, 3 on the tree. Heater worked when it felt like it. Tyler grinned. "You drove that in winter?" "Had to. Work didn't stop because the heater was moody." Daniel cut in again. Dad remembers parts of things. I think that truck was an 80. No, I said. It was a 78. He shrugged and smiled into his plate. Could have sworn it was later. It was a small thing, the kind of thing a reasonable person lets slide. I did let it slide. But I felt something old move in me, something I knew too well. That tired little shove between the ribs that comes when a person close to you starts trimming pieces off what you know. My wife used to squeeze my knee under the table when that happened. Not to shut me up, to say she saw it too. Emily asked Tyler about basketball tryouts, and for a minute the room loosened. I ate some roast. It was good. Kelsey always cooked meat longer than Margaret had, but she seasoned it right. The younger granddaughter Chloe came in for more rolls and left with one tucked under each arm like a squirrel, and everybody laughed. That ought to have settled things. Instead, Daniel looked over at me and said, "You still driving at night much?" "Dad." Some meaning what? Meaning I went to Menard's Thursday after dark and somehow survived it. Emily looked down into her potatoes. Daniel smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I'm serious." "So am I," Kelsey said softly. "He's just worried." I took a drink of coffee that had gone lukewarm. "About Menard's." "About you getting turned around," Daniel said. "I know where Menard's is. That's not really the point." There it was again. Not loud, not enough to call a scene. Just that same smooth little hand on the back of your neck, steering your face where somebody else wanted it pointed. I said, "You ask a lot of questions these days that don't sound like questions." Nobody said anything for a moment. You could hear the fork tines against the plates. Football crowd noise from the den. Water running somewhere upstairs. Kelsey smiled the way people do when they think a room needs help. "We've all been talking about simplifying some things for you, Walt. Just practical stuff." I looked at her, then at Daniel. "Who's all?" Daniel leaned back. "Come on, don't make it into something. Then what is it?" He wiped his mouth with his napkin, took his time, and gave me that patient expression I had started to hate before I knew I hated it. "It's just that there are a few things we should probably get organized while everything's still straightforward." Emily set her fork down. I already knew before he said house or paper or signature that this was where the evening had been heading all along. Men don't start talking to you like you're slipping unless there's some advantage in your being seen that way. I said, "Organized how?" Daniel laughed once under his breath, not kindly. "Dad, this is what I mean. We've had this conversation." "No," I said. "You may have had one." "I haven't." His face changed then. Just a little. The softness went out of it, and what showed underneath looked tired of waiting. "For God's sake," he said. "The deed paperwork. The house. We've been over this. Kelsey and I can't keep circling back every few months because you forget where things stand." Emily said Daniel, but he was already going. "I'm not trying to be cruel here. I'm trying to be realistic. You get mixed up, Dad. It happens. You tell the same stories, you lose the thread, you argue details that aren't right. We're all seeing it." Kelsey touched his wrist. "Daniel." He pulled his hand back, eyes still on me. "What are we supposed to do, pretend everybody's dancing around it?" I could feel Tyler looking at me from my left. Chloe had gone quiet in the doorway. Even the television seemed farther away. Then Daniel said it. "Sometimes you sound senile, and I'm the only one willing to say it." Nobody moved. Not Emily, not Kelsey, not me. The words sat on the table between the potato sauce and the green beans like something dropped there by mistake, only nobody reached to pick it up. Kelsey spoke first too fast. "He doesn't mean that the way it sounded." I looked at my son. How did he mean it? Daniel exhaled hard through his nose like I was making him do the unpleasant adult thing. "I mean, we need to handle what needs handling." I stood up slow enough not to rattle the chair. Emily pushed back from the table too. "Dad." "I'm fine," I said. That was the lie I chose because it was the only one left with any dignity in it. Kelsey followed me into the entryway while I put on my coat. "Please don't leave like this. How else is a man supposed to leave after that?" She winced. "He's under stress. Is that what this is called now?" "Behind us," Daniel said. "Dad, don't be dramatic. We need to talk about the house while things are still simple." I turned and looked at him. He was standing half in the dining room, half out, one hand on the chair back, like the room still belonged to him completely. Simple. That was a good word for what he wanted. A small word. Clean. Efficient. The kind men use when they want the hard part hidden inside it. I nodded once because I didn't trust what might come out if I opened my mouth again. The drive home took 23 minutes. I knew because I looked at the dashboard clock at every red light like it owed me something. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Hilliard, the sky had gone black and the front porch light was burning against the siding just the way I'd left it. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust-old wood and the coffee I'd made that morning. No voices, no television, just the refrigerator humming and the heat kicking on. I stood in the den a long minute with my keys in my hand. Then I crossed to the built-in cabinet Margaret had insisted we keep when everybody else was tearing theirs out in the early 2000s. I knelt, opened the lower door, and reached behind the old photo albums for the fireproof safe. The dial felt cold under my fingers. When it opened, the packet was still there exactly where I had left it. The deed to my son's house sat on top, unsigned, unforgotten, locked in my safe. I stayed on the floor beside that cabinet longer than I needed to. The safe sat open against my knees, the deed packet in my hands, and the house around me had that deep nighttime stillness old houses get when the furnace cycles off, and even the pipes seem to be listening. Margaret used to tell me not to kneel on hardwood in my socks because someday my knees would collect the debt. She'd been right about that, too. I took the papers to the dining room table and laid them out under the hanging light. The unsigned deed was on top. Under it sat the notarized side letter Martin Kehoe had drafted for me 8 years earlier, folded neat and yellowing slightly along the creases. Beneath that were copies of bank records, a cashier's check receipt, and one ugly little page from a lender showing a shortfall. Daniel had never meant for me to see. I knew what they were before I looked. That was the trouble. I had known for years. I just hadn't made myself sit down and feel what they meant all the way through. Back then, Daniel had come to me talking fast and bright, the way he used to when he was a boy with a plan. He and Kelsey had found the house rates were moving inventory was tight, and if they didn't act now, they'd miss it. He said there'd been a hiccup with underwriting, nothing major, just some timing and one paperwork issue, but it was all getting ironed out. He asked if I could help bridge things for a few weeks. Not forever. Just until the lender finished shuffling things through. Margaret had still been alive then, sitting across from me in this same dining room with her tea, saying very little while Daniel talked. When he left, she said, "He didn't tell you everything." I said, "Probably not." "You always know that," she said, "and you always help anyway." There wasn't much accusation in it. That almost made it worse. A week later, Martin called and said there was more to the file than Daniel had disclosed. Some debt ratio problem, some use of my name and credit profile in preliminary discussions that had traveled farther than it should have without my full understanding. Not outright criminal, Martin told me, but not honest either. Not clean. I remember sitting in Martin's office with my hands flat on my thighs, staring at the diploma on the wall behind him and feeling something heavy and familiar settle into place inside me. Not surprise exactly, more the old recognition of where I lived in my son's life. Useful first, informed later. I could have pulled out then. Maybe I should have. But Daniel had 2 little kids. Kelsey was already talking paint colors, and I could see the thing collapsing before they even moved in. I covered the gap, quietly. Martin drafted the deed package, and then I told him to hold transfer until I decided otherwise. I did not tell Daniel why. I told myself I was sparing him shame. sparing the kids, sparing the family a scar that didn't need to show if things improved. I see now that all I spared was his comfort. The phone rang just after 9:30. Emily. I let it ring once more before answering. "You home?" she said. "Yes." She was quiet a second. "He had no right." "No." "You okay?" "No," I said, and that seemed to surprise both of us. I heard her shift, maybe sitting down somewhere. "I almost got up and left with you. You've got your own life." "That's not what stopped me." I looked at the side letter under my hand. What did I wanted to see how far he was willing to go? That sat with me. Then she said, "Dad, this isn't new." I leaned back in the chair. "What isn't?" "The way he talks about you when you're not there." I looked toward the dark kitchen. The microwave clock read 9:37 in green numbers. "He says little things," she went on, "that you repeat yourself, that you get mixed up on dates, that you're getting harder to pin down, like he's planting a garden one seed at a time." I closed my eyes. At first I thought it was just Daniel being Daniel, she said, needing to sound like the responsible one, but lately it's been every time property comes up, or you're driving, or paperwork. He says it in that calm voice so people don't hear how ugly it is. I rubbed a hand over my mouth. "Why didn't you tell me? Because every time I pushed back, you shrugged it off. You always shrug it off." She was right. I had. Men like me were raised to take a lot of things as weather. You don't call every cold wind a storm. You keep your jacket on and get through supper. "I thought if I didn't feed it, it would pass," I said. "Has that worked?" I looked back down at the papers spread on the table. "No." She let that settle. Then softer. "What's really going on with the house?" For a while, all I did was listen to the hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. Emily had earned the truth 10 times over, maybe more. But saying things aloud changes them. It takes what you've carried privately and makes it stand up in the room. "He never told you?" I asked. "Told me what?" "That when they bought that house, things weren't as smooth as he made them sound." "No. There was a hole in the deal," I said. "Larger than he admitted. Martin found out he'd been leaning on my credit and my name more than I'd been told. I covered it. Then I told Martin to hold the deed transfer." Emily didn't speak for a few seconds. Finally, she said, "Jesus. Don't improve on it. And he's calling you senile over paperwork. He knows isn't settled, that's what's sitting in front of me." Another silence. Then she said in a voice I hadn't heard from her since she was 16 and Daniel took credit for something she'd done, he thinks if he says it calmly enough it stops being cruel. I picked up the side letter and unfolded it. Martin's language was precise, dry, formal. At the time I had liked that about it. No feelings, just sequence, condition, authority. Easier to live with paper than with hurt. "I should have handled this years ago," I said. "Yes," Emily said. "Not unkindly, just true. But you didn't, so now handle it." After we hung up, I stayed at the table another hour, not reading so much as remembering. Daniel at 8 with a fever on my shoulder. Daniel at 17 asking for money in that same urgent voice. Daniel at 35 walking through that new house with his arm around Kelsey, acting like he had hauled the thing up out of the dirt with his bare hands. And me, every time finding some reason to stay quiet that made me feel decent. By morning I knew 2 things. First, I had not forgotten a damn thing. Second, my silence had not preserved love. It had trained disrespect to grow comfortable. I called Martin at 9. He told me to come by at 11. His office sat 2 blocks from the county courthouse in an old brick building with narrow stairs and brass mail slots no one used anymore. Martin had represented us in one thing or another for years. Estate work for Margaret and me. The house matter for Daniel. A zoning issue once when I was still in business. He was 67, lean as a fence post, with half-moon glasses and a tie that always looked like he had put it on for the law rather than for any human being. He waved me in, closed the door, and looked at my face once before saying, I take it dinner was not a success. I handed him the packet. He opened it carefully, though he knew every sheet in there better than I did. He read in silence for a few minutes, then took off his glasses and laid them on the desk. "You still have all of it," he said. "I keep what matters locked up. I can see that." I sat in the leather chair opposite him. The room smelled faintly of paper radiator heat and old coffee. "Tell me plain," I said. "I always do. No lawyer plain. My plain." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. He tapped the unsigned deed. Title to Daniel's house did not fully transfer. "I know that. You want the rest. I want it out loud." Martin leaned back. "You instructed me to prepare transfer documents after you covered the financing gap. Then, after I informed you of the undisclosed use of your financial standing in the underwriting chain, you instructed me not to finalize recording until further notice. I drafted the side letter to memorialize that instruction and the reason for it. That letter was notarized. The supporting financial record is here." He touched the bank copies. Nothing about this was accidental. Nothing was forgotten. I looked at the desk blotter between us. If he says I agreed and then lost the thread, Martin shook his head, then he would be lying. I felt that land in me with more force than I expected, not because I didn't know it, because another man had said it without lowering his voice. Martin watched me a moment. "Walt, did Daniel know why you held it? He knew I stepped in. He knew I wasn't pleased. I never gave him the whole of it, why I gave a tired laugh, because he was my son." Martin put his glasses back on. "That has cost you?" "Yes." "He contacted my office last month," Martin said. I looked up. What he called my assistant first, then left a message for me. Asked generally what would be needed to tidy up old title paperwork if a parent was becoming forgetful. The room changed shape around me then. Not suddenly. More like a board in the floor giving way under weight you hadn't realized was all in one place. "Did you call him back?" "No." Martin's face went still. "I thought it improper without speaking to you. Also, I did not care for the wording." I sat there with both hands on the chair arms, holding very still. That was the moment it quit being a bad dinner and became what it had been all along. Not impatience, not stress, not one son speaking ugly in the heat of supper. Groundwork. He had been laying track. Martin said, "You need to decide whether you want peace or clarity. You are not going to keep both." I thought of Daniel saying simple, of Kelsey smoothing the air, of Tyler watching me from the table like he was trying to figure out whether old age arrived all at once or one embarrassing moment at a time. Then I thought of the word senile sitting on the table beside the green beans. "Clarity," I said. Martin nodded once as if he had expected nothing else. Then let him ask for a meeting. Do not argue beforehand. Do not explain. Let him state his understanding in front of witnesses. My daughter should be there. "Yes. And you?" "Yes." He gathered the packet into a neat stack and slid it back toward me. "When he calls, agree pleasantly." I took the papers and stood up. My legs felt older than they had yesterday, but steadier too. Daniel called before I even made it home. His voice came through the truck speakers smooth as fresh paint. "Dad, about last night. We should sit down and clear the air. Maybe tomorrow evening. Me, you, Kelsey. Just talk through the house paperwork once and for all." I turned off Cemetery Road and watched the light change ahead of me. "Tomorrow's fine," I said. "Good," he said, relieved already. "I think that's for the best. So do I." And, for the first time since he was a boy, I let my son walk straight towards something I had already decided not to stop. The next evening I got to Daniel's house 10 minutes early on purpose. There was a time in my life when being early meant respect. You showed up before the thing started, took your coat off, stood where you were told, and kept your word. Somewhere along the line that turned into old man behavior, something rigid, something people smiled at and worked around. Emily was already in the driveway when I pulled in. She got out of her Subaru with her arms folded against the cold, waiting for me instead of heading inside. "You sure?" she asked when I stepped out. "No," I said. "But I'm here." She nodded once. "That'll do." The house looked the same as it had 2 nights before. Porch light on. Wreath still hanging, though Christmas had been over for weeks. Warm yellow in the front windows, a place built to make a man think family and safety were the same thing. Kelsey opened the door before we knocked, all soft voice and sweater and worried eyes. "Hi," she said. "Come in. Daniel's in the kitchen." She looked at Emily and gave a small, careful smile, like she wasn't sure whether Emily had come as daughter or witness. Smart not to ask. Martin arrived a minute later, carrying a dark leather briefcase. Kelsey's face changed when she saw him. Just a flicker, but enough. Daniel came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, saw Martin and stopped. "What's this?" he said. Martin answered before I could. "Good evening, Daniel." Daniel forced a smile that didn't make it to his eyes. I didn't realize this was that kind of meeting. "That depends," I said, taking off my coat. He looked at me, then really looked, maybe for the first time in a while. What he saw must have unsettled him some, because he turned brisk again and said, "All right, fine. Let's sit down." Not at the dining table this time. The kitchen table, smaller. Round oak. 4 chairs and one pulled in from the dining room. Kelsey had set out coffee, but nobody touched it. I noticed that right away, the way I notice stupid details when something matters. 5 mugs, sugar bowl, little pitcher of half and half, nobody pouring. Daniel took the chair nearest the counter, the one with the widest line of sight. Kelsey sat beside him. Emily took my left. Martin set his briefcase on the floor before sitting across from me. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Daniel let out a breath through his nose and put both hands on the table like he was starting a meeting at work. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry about Sunday. I shouldn't have used that word. That surprised me enough that I nearly missed the rest. But the bigger issue hasn't changed." There it was. A tidy little apology rolled over hard ground. He glanced at Martin and gave him that same polished, capable expression I'd seen him use with contractors and waiters and men he wanted to impress without seeming to try. "I'm not looking for conflict. I just think we need to clear up old paperwork while my father still feels up to dealing with it. He's been confused lately. We all know that. I'm trying to make things easier before they get harder." Kelsey lowered her eyes to the table in a way that said she found this painful but necessary. Emily didn't move at all. I said nothing. Daniel kept going. "The title stuff has obviously dragged on too long. I assumed it was oversight at first, then forgetfulness. Either way, it needs finishing." He looked at me with practiced patience, the same face he'd worn over pot roast and green beans. "I'm not trying to take anything from you, Dad. I'm trying to deal with what should have been done years ago." I let him finish because Martin told me to. More than that, because I wanted one thing clean for him to build the whole shape of his lie where everyone could see it. When the room finally went quiet, Martin bent down, opened his briefcase, and took out a thin folder. The sound of the clasp was small. That was all it took. Daniel sat back. "What exactly is in there?" Martin laid the first document on the table and turned it so Daniel could read it from where he sat. "The deed packet for your property," he said, "unrecorded." Daniel frowned. "That's not possible." "It is," Martin said, "because title never fully transferred." Kelsey looked at Daniel then. "Quick, sharp." Daniel gave a short laugh, but it came out flat. "No, that's wrong. We've lived here 8 years. "Yes," Martin said. "You have?" Daniel looked at me. "Dad." I kept my hands folded in front of me. "Let him talk." Martin took off his glasses, wiped one lens with his handkerchief, then put them back on. It was the same motion he'd made 100 times over the years, but tonight it felt ceremonial. "Mr. Brennan advanced funds to stabilize the purchase when financing issues arose," he said. "Transfer documents were prepared. Before final recording, however, he instructed me to suspend completion." Daniel's voice sharpened. Why Martin reached into the folder and drew out the side letter. Because he said the financing issues were not presented to him honestly. There had been undisclosed use of his name and financial standing in lender communications beyond what he had authorized or understood. He elected to protect the household from immediate collapse while withholding full transfer until further notice. No one moved. I watched Daniel read the first line of the letter, then the second. Watched the blood drain from his face in slow degrees, like something being lowered. "That's ridiculous," he said finally. "This was years ago." "Yes," Martin said. "And you're saying he just sat on this?" "I'm saying," Martin replied, "that your father did not forget anything. He made a decision." Daniel looked at me as if the room had tilted and he needed me to put it back. "Dad." I explained all that he said. There were timing problems. Everybody knew that. "No," I said. "You explained what made you look less reckless. That's not fair." I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because some words still come dressed for church even when they're dirty. "Fair," I said. "You called me senile at your dinner table." I apologized. You apologized to get to the paperwork faster. Kelsey spoke for the first time. "Walt, that's not..." I turned to her. "Do not soften this for him." She stopped. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," Emily said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut clean across the room. "He's finally putting it in proportion." Daniel shot her a look. "Stay out of it." She didn't blink. "You've had months to stop talking about Dad like he's slipping." "You didn't." He looked back at me. "So what is this?" "You bring a lawyer and Emily over to embarrass me." That was the first honest thing he'd said all night. Not because embarrassment was my goal, because it told me exactly what he thought the real injury was. Not the lie, not the insult, not the years of stepping around my dignity like it was furniture. No. The injury to Daniel was that the room might stop arranging itself around him. I leaned forward then. "Not much, just enough." "You want to know what this is?" I said. He didn't answer. "This is me saying it plain, since plain is the only thing you seem to understand once paper's involved. You stood in a house I helped keep from falling through, and you used my age to tell your family I don't know my own mind. You don't get to do that. Not to me. Not in shelter. I kept upright." Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I went on. "You didn't just want the deed. If that was all you wanted, you could have asked and gotten a no, like a grown man. What you wanted was for the no not to count. That's what the word senile was for. That's what the little comments were for. You were building a version of me that would be easier to move." Kelsey looked down at her hands. Emily looked at me, and for 1 second I saw my wife in her face so clearly, it hurt. Daniel found his voice again, but it had changed. Less smooth now, younger almost. "I was trying to protect my family." I nodded. So was I. That's the difference between us. I did it without making my father smaller. The room held that. Martin slid the bank records forward. For the sake of clarity, he said, "These are copies of the funds advanced by your father to close the purchase gap. These correspond to the same time period as the suspended transfer. Legally speaking, the status is straightforward." Daniel didn't touch them. "What does that mean?" Kelsey asked quietly. "Straightforward." Martin answered her in the same tone he might use to explain a fence line dispute. "It means the property is not fully his. It means your father retains controlling leverage. It means nothing about this can be treated as forgotten housekeeping." Kelsey closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she looked not at Daniel, but at me. "You really saved this house?" she asked. I took a breath. "I kept it from unraveling, yes. Why didn't you ever say that?" "Because I was a fool, I thought. Because I thought love improved in the dark." Aloud, I said, "Because I was trying to spare him." Daniel pushed back from the table so suddenly the chair legs scraped hard across the floor. "So what now?" "You hold this over us forever." That was the old Daniel, too. Not sorry, cornered. I stood up slowly. My knees complained, but not enough to matter. No, I said. Now nothing gets held over anybody. Now it sits where it always sat. In truth. He stared at me. The deed stays where it is, I said. Until I decide otherwise. And I won't be deciding anything under pressure, under insult, or under some story about my mind that you built because you didn't like the answer you might get. His face went red, then pale. You'd do this to your own son. I looked at him a long time before I answered. No, I said. You did this to your own father. That was the line that ended it. Not because it solved anything. It didn't. But because there wasn't any good place left for the lie to stand after that. Kelsey didn't smooth it. Emily didn't cushion it. Even Daniel seemed to understand, at least for that minute, that he had crossed into country where his usual voice did not carry. Martin packed his papers. Emily got her coat. I put mine on in the entryway while Kelsey stood by the stairs, looking as if the house had changed shape around her. Daniel didn't walk us out. On the porch, the air had gone sharp enough to sting my teeth. Emily touched my arm before heading to her car. You okay? She asked. I looked back once through the front window. Daniel was still standing in the kitchen, one hand on the chair he'd shoved back like he was trying to remember what it had felt like to own the room. No, I said. Then after a moment, but I'm not mistaken anymore. She nodded, and that was enough. I slept badly and woke before dawn. The house was cold in that honest way houses get before the heat catches up. I padded down the hallway in my socks, turned on the lamp in the den, and opened the cabinet beneath the built-ins. The safe came out heavy in my hands. Same weight as always, maybe less. I worked the dial by feel. Inside the deed packet lay where I had put it back after coming home. I touched the top page once with my fingertips, not tenderly, not like a relic, more like a man laying a hand on the hood of a truck he'd finally gotten back into his own name. Then I closed the safe. In the kitchen, I took Margaret's chipped blue mug down from the second shelf. The chip was on the handle side, small and white against the glaze. She used to say it felt better in her hand that way, gave the thumb a place to land. I poured the coffee and stood by the sink while the first weak light found the backyard fence. Nothing was fixed. My son was still my son. The years were still the years. There are some things truth can set right and some it can only stop from getting worse. But the room was quiet in a different way now. For the first time in a long while, it did not feel occupied by somebody else's version of me.